Hi everyone. It's probably not good to start a presentation with an apology, but I am. As you can see from the title slide, I am meant to be doing this with a colleague of mine. Unfortunately, she's not very well, so I am stepping into the breach, as it were, and doing it on my own. As such, if there's some bits I'm ever so slightly vague on, that's why. But as you can see, we're here to talk about a project about widening the arc of friendship, which was based around our Iris Murdoch collections at Kingston University. Just to give a bit of background, Kingston University Archives and Special Collections, we were founded back in 2004 to support the teaching and research of the university. That gives us an incredibly wide remit for collecting. In practice, we've actually become quite focused on certain areas that we collect in. This is just a very small snapshot of the areas. We have a number of theatre-related collections, as you can probably guess from a very nice stage model. We have a Balkan history collection. We have a couple of collections relating to publishing, and of course we have collections relating to Kingston University and its many predecessor bodies. And our main area of, well, not our main area, one of our other main areas collecting is literature. We have the papers of an author, Wendy Perriam. We also, of course, have Iris Murdoch related collections. Our Iris Murdoch related collections are vast. They span pretty much every area of Murdoch's life. It started with us getting in libraries that she owned from her house in Oxford and her flat in London. The Oxford Library was particularly interesting because it has books that are annotated by Murdoch on philosophy. For those of you who don't know much about Iris Murdoch's background, she was obviously a very well-known author. She had 25 novels published in her lifetime. Several which were nominated for the Booker Prize and one of which won, which was DCDC. She was also a well-known philosopher, and her philosophy is actually coming very much back to the fore in the world of philosophy studies at the moment. So the books in the Oxford Library with the annotations are particularly of interest to those looking at Murdoch's philosophy. We've also got some unusual things in with the libraries. You can see up there Murdoch's collection of beer coasters. Of which there are over 80, which she obviously nicked from pubs at some point throughout her life. We've also got a very large collection of music scores from the early 20th century, and Iris Murdoch's Roman oil lamps, which are about 2,000 years old. So as you can imagine, they don't come out of the boxes very often. We also hold a number of document collections. It's research papers from Murdoch's official biography, which is by Peter Conradi, and letters. We have an awful lot of letters. In fact, Iris Murdoch spent 4 hours a day writing letters, always handwritten. She hated technology. And we now have over 3,000 letters written by Iris Murdoch in our collections. As you can imagine, that's quite a lot. Now, these collections have obviously been very well used by our scholars and our own students, but we really wanted to widen out access to Iris Murdoch. She was seen very much as a very serious subject and one not for the amateurs to touch. This slide I've kept in. It was one which we showed groups which we worked with on the Murdoch collections as part of this project. And I know most of the archivists out there are kind of thinking, well, duh, of course that's what we do. However, while we know that, our researchers don't necessarily know it. And we found that a lot of perspective, particularly of collections on a scholarly subject like Iris Murdoch in the community was, it's not for me, it's shut up. It's going to be covered in dust and the archivist is going to be cackling over it wildly in the corner. Of course, it's not the case. So we were really trying to emphasise to the people we worked with that the collections were there for them. So this was the project we came up with. The opportunity came about because the letters came on the market from Iris Murdoch to Philippa Foot. Philippa Foot is extremely well known in the philosophy world. She was one of a group of female philosophers in the 20th century who tried to make philosophy practical. Her view of philosophy was, well, what good is it to the average person? And she wrote on that subject. She and Iris Murdoch met back at university in the 1930s, and they kept in touch throughout the rest of their lives. Now, what was interesting is that Philippa Foot's family was actually from the US. She's actually the granddaughter of an American president, and she therefore spent quite a lot of time working over there. And as such, a lot of her and Iris Murdoch's friendship was conducted via letters. The collection had over 250 letters and postcards in it, so it was an extremely large one. And obviously we could have got the letters and they would have been sat with all the others, but we wanted to use this as an opportunity for people to see that there's a lot more to the Iris Murdoch collections, and a lot more to the archive than just these materials we keep purely for academics. So we went to the Heritage Lottery Fund and asked very nicely for some money, and they very kindly gave it to us. And this money was to acquire the letters themselves and also to do a body of work around it. And we planned for a project that was going to last for a year. This is just the project team. The two project coordinator, project officer was Anne Rowe and Frances White, who actually worked in the Iris Murdoch Archives project at the university. So they are academic staff. They were ideally based to participate in the project because they are extremely passionate about Murdoch and they'd spent many years working with the collections. But they were also very keen to move beyond the academic world, so they were very keen to pursue this. And you can kind of see that I'm slipping in there at the end as well, as I was kind of the advisor for the archival side on the project. Project participants, we went for quite a lot, as you can see. Essentially, we went out to pretty much every group in the local community and said, would you be interested? And these are the ones who said, yes. You can see those community groups in there, local charities, local reading groups. They were very important to us because we wanted to reach out to people who wouldn't necessarily have considered reading Murdoch's work. And local schools as well. They were another important group we wanted to reach out to. And the age range that the project reached was from age 10 to age 83. Now, the 10-year-old probably didn't get much of the philosophy side, let's be honest, but she had a great time anyway. She obviously loved it. So we really wanted to widen the access to Murdoch's collection. We didn't want it to be just the limit of students and adults. We wanted everyone to explore it. And we had another number of project activities planned. What we did with these is that we cherry-picked pretty much on this list for each group. And when we initially planned the project, we said we will do set things with each group and we'll repeat it over and over. Didn't work out like that. The needs of each group was extremely diverse, and not all of these activities would have worked with all of them. So we kind of picked out the ones we liked. Archive visits were a very important part, and that is one element we did with every single group we worked with. We wanted to get people into the archive to experience what it was like in an archival context. And these were groups that wouldn't have normally come in there. Most of them had never even been at university before, let alone an archive. Other of the events were planned well before the project started, as you can see from the London walks, the trips to the National Gallery and the National Portrait Gallery. Others came about a bit more spontaneously as the project evolved, particularly the storytelling performances. That was one we hadn't really planned for, but came about by chance. But it actually was a really nice way of engaging people who wouldn't have the literary skills to engage with the collection to actually work with us. And this is just the icon of the collection was this very lovely red bag, which much to my surprise, the letters turned up in. I assumed they'd been in a box or something, you know, but there you go. And this was the bag that the letters have been held in for the last, you know, however many years going back. And as you can see, you did the project from 2012 to 2013. The letters themselves cost £50,000, but the grant overall from the Heritage Lottery Fund was £107,000. So it was quite a lot. And just to give you an idea of what we were working with, some of the letters from Iris Murdoch, Philippa Foot are here. This is a general spread. You can see that there's a range of different types of paper, which also had different conservation concerns depending. We also had a lot of Airmail letters. The community groups really liked these because they were visual. And they were particularly good for some of our charities for people who weren't so good with working with very high literature material. The downside of Airmail paper, as any of you know who's worked with them, is it's incredibly fragile. So we had a real balancing act there between letting people use the material and protecting it. And we had postcards. Again, the postcards were very popular because they were very visual. They were also very important for triggering discussions about travel. And there's a lot of discussion about travel in the letters, and it was something that pretty much all the groups could relate to. So they were extremely popular as well. This is the very first letter in the collection. It was actually written back in 1942 when Murdoch was living in London. She was working for the Treasury at the time. This was very important when we worked with age concern because it had in it, you can't really tell from that page, but it had in it a lot of information about Murdoch's life in London during the Blitz. And for them, it was a kind of a memory thing. It triggered memories of their own time when they'd lived throughout the Second World War. So we quite enjoyed working with that and hearing their memories that it evoked. We also had this postcard. It was very basic and to the point, but we quite liked it because it was. And this, which was actually ended up being one of the most popular pieces in the whole collection. This is actually a drawing by Iris Murdoch, which she sent to Philippa Foot. They'd had a bit of a falling out, and they'd gotten friends again. And this, what she did, and it ended up being called The Dog of Happiness. We had difficulty convincing some people it wasn't actually a goat, but we are pretty sure it was a dog. And this became extremely popular because it was very visual. Now we had, once we got the letters in, the first thing we wanted to do was know what we had in them, so we got them transcribed. And we had a very dedicated team of transcribers who literally blitzed transcribed over the course of a few weeks. And we had members of a local reading group who came in, and we also went out to school and university students. The school students did slightly horrify me by telling me it was the first time they'd worked with handwriting since they'd been in primary school. So that was a nice challenge for them. But it was good because it got them engaging with the letters, and they all actually gave really positive feedback about doing that. We also host group discussions in the archive. All the groups could come in and they all got to see actual letters. I didn't use copies of any of them because for me it was important they got experience the tangible, real thing. And it also showed, into a sense, that some of these groups who would normally be in archive, we did trust them. We weren't going to shut them out because they're not normally in there. And as you can see, they all really got involved. They enjoyed looking at them. And they then went on to have other group visits and discussions at other locations. Kingston Library. Kingston Library was used for continuing discussions, partly because they could do creative work in there, and we liked having creative responses to the project because it really helped people engage with the material, and it was their way of expressing what they learnt. Kingston Library had another obvious advantage in that they could drink tea and biscuits in there, which was rather popular, because obviously I wasn't going to let them go and do that in the archive. So, and pretty much every group had about 4 sessions, including one in the archive, 1 trip to London, and a couple in the library. We also had school visits, which I'm going to try and run through quickly, although with the trouble I'm having with the mouse, I might not. We actually had 2 school groups come in. The schools were the most difficult group to engage with, simply because a lot of schools expressed interest, but when it actually came to doing anything, we didn't actually get such a good response from them. So it was the most challenging part in that respect of the project. Having said that, the students actually they enjoyed it, they had a good time, and we had groups of A-level students in from 2 local schools, and they spent their time researching in the archive and looking at a range of the material. And you can see that we got a range of material out for them there. And I helped out with handwriting. You can see me lurking over someone's shoulder. And there are some more. The actual schools did do some creative responses for us, which included making Iris Murdoch's Facebook page, which we thought was rather lovely. And we displayed their responses actually in an exhibition we did at the end of the project. So they obviously took a lot of the premise of communication in the letters and how that had evolved, and they used that for a lot of their discussion. They also knew a frightening amount about philosophy for their age, I have to say. They knew a lot more than either me or Francis did, which made me just feel slightly inadequate throughout the course of the project, but never mind. And then we're getting on to the main focus of the talk, which is our Adults with Learning Difficulties group. This was a group you were keen to reach out to. I think it went slightly differently than we planned originally, because when we first contacted the group, I don't think we quite realised the extent of their disabilities, unfortunately. The literacy level amongst them were very low. In fact, many of the members of the group just couldn't read or write at all. Which, of course, with a collection of letters, that suddenly becomes a challenge to work with. But we were very keen to have them in the archive. Unlike the other groups where the archive was the first session they did, we actually did an introductory session with them first. to kind of prepare them, because this was a whole new experience for them, and it took quite a lot of bravery for many of them to actually go beyond their comfort zone and visit a university and see the archive. So once we'd set the scene, we actually did get them, we had the group visit the archive. I gave a very brief intro into what archives are and what they do. Obviously, I kept this relatively short because they were actually there to look at the letters, they weren't there to listen to me, frankly. And then we got out the original letters for them to actually look at. Now, the most important thing we learned with this group was to actually listen to the experts. There was a number of carers came with them, and without their help, we really couldn't have done it. And we had to adapt how we did the group visit slightly. Normally, we'd have all the items out on a table, and they could lift them up, pick them up. In this case, we actually kept it to relatively small numbers and passed them round, because otherwise the carers thought they might feel overwhelmed by the sheer amount of material out. We also had to take into account the fact that many of them actually had a limited attention span, so we decided to put things around the room for them to look at. And the map proved particularly important. Obviously, with this group, we didn't want to go into big discussions about philosophy and everything because it wasn't within their experience, so there was no point. Travel, friendship, love, those themes in the letters, those we could discuss with them. And they were really, really keen. They got really engaged. The other thing we did is go for items of visual appeal because they could really keen to that as well. So the postcards, the airmail letters, and so forth. And they actually asked a lot of very insightful questions about it. And I think they actually got quite attached to Iris by the end of the session. Now, we were advised by their group leader that they quite like being recognised for doing something special. So we created certificates for them. And that was presented to them by Anne Rowe, who was the project leader. And here's the certificate. Also see that they also did a creative response, much like our schools, and they created this absolutely lovely postbox for letters for Iris Murdoch, and they all did something for Iris Murdoch. Most of the cases it was a copy of the Dog of Happiness drawing, although one person did a cat because they didn't like dogs because they were mean. So I actually thought that was really nice because they so interpreted the collection in their own way, and one person just did this massive heart because they loved Iris so much, which it was really touching. And they then went away and they created their own poster as well for it. So all in all, the visit was actually a real success. When it comes to the lessons learnt, actually, I'm going to skip having the slide up because it's taking too much time. When it comes to the lessons learned, mainly there were 4 things. The first thing was to always talk to the experts. We weren't sure what we were going to do with this group, particularly the adults with learning difficulties, but all the groups, they all have their own different needs, and we had it in our head, oh, we do this. Didn't always work. So we had to talk to the group leaders and the experts, and they actually really liked the fact that we asked them for help and we didn't just assume that we were going to go off and do our own thing and it'd all be fine. So if you want to think about doing anything like this, do talk to the local community group leaders, talk to carers, get all the expert opinions you can get in. The second thing we learned was to be adaptable and have to think on your feet a bit. If you had said to me over a year ago, you need to do a talk on Iris Murdoch to a group of people whose literacy level is so low they can't actually read or write, I probably would have said, you must be joking, because all the collections are very textual in the nature. But it is possible, that's what this taught us. And it actually came really valuable, because I had a college group visit the archive a few months after the project ended. No one had actually told me in advance that this was a group with learning difficulties from that college, so I had to very quickly change what it was I was going to say. And by doing this talk, I actually could do that. The other thing is really, if you feel the fear, but do it anyway. It is very easy to kind of retreat and say, oh no, we can't talk to this group, we can't do that, it's not possible. It really is, but you have to be creative. Find a creative response and go for it. And it is incredibly rewarding, and we got extremely good comments as a result of the project. My contact details are on the slide. I'm not going to go through and bring them up, but I know the PowerPoint presentations will be circulated. So if you want to ask us any questions or ask us anything about the project, then please do get in touch. We're more than happy to help. Thank you.